Where can I watch the 1974 Mel Brooks movie, Young Frankenstein? It's not on Netflix. Let me check Prime. Nope, not there either. Now TV? No? Apple TV? Disney? BFI player? How is it I can go through 20 available subscription services but not find a pretty famous movie? And how are there even that many subscription services now? And why are there adverts on half of them? Oh, and they're all putting their prices up. What the hell has happened to TV subscription services? Television networks have long been the subject of dismay, whether talking of the BBC and its mandatory TV licence, or the competing cable and satellite TV services charging absurd amounts for the free channels we want and the 150 we don't. I'm looking at you, QVC. So when Netflix began offering a genuine alternative, built around an entirely online service and a price that was a quarter of what most Sky or Virgin packages were charging at the time, I, and many of my fellow millennials, jumped ship almost immediately, with many even giving up their journeys on the high seas. It turns out that if you can provide a good quality, good value avenue for something, people will generally pick that route, as opposed to resorting to piracy. It's almost as if there's a lesson to be learned there. But this is Britain, and learning is exactly what the wokerati want you to do. For a while, we had it quite good, paying £5 or £6 a month for a whole bunch of movies and TV shows with no ad breaks, and with every new season having all its episodes available all at once, meaning no weekly wait for the next episode, which for those of us who can lose interest quickly, was an absolute godsend. It was almost as if Netflix had set themselves up based on the premise of what would the consumer want from a TV subscription service. Novel. Then Amazon Prime entered the fray, and that was okay, as we liked the free delivery and access to a bunch more movies, so really the cost for another whole bunch of content wasn't too bad. And now we had even more to watch. 2 subscription services with on-demand models, no adverts, and for less than half what a Sky subscription would cost. Finally, the consumer is winning. Oh, sweet summer child. Fast forward to 2024. Now the ad breaks are returning, shows are releasing an episode a week, and each company that makes a program I like has their own subscription service for the 6 things they make. And it costs the same as Netflix, which is now more than twice the price it was. And it keeps cancelling shows, and now we can only use 2 devices, and only from this location. And what the fuck? It turns out that TV subscription services are a lot like privatised bus services. They used to be cheap and convenient, but now they cost twice as much for half the service, and you're pretty sure they hate you. TV subscriptions are something of a metaphor for the neoliberal world, as increasingly every industry seeks to move itself to a subscription model and to remove the concept of ownership from consumption. We saw this first in the music industry, then in TV, and now it's doing the same thing with video games, with live service games and Game Pass. With this video, I'm looking to answer 3 questions. Ideally without sending my mind screaming to the abyssal voidscape of late-stage capitalism. Why subscription TV? Why are subscription services getting worse? What could a left-wing model of TV subscription services look like? In each section, we will look at some information about subscription services, the logic and theory behind why all this might be happening, and what this might mean for the wider world, especially as we move towards a subscription-based economy, where a smaller and smaller number of rights holders can extract rents from us for everything we need to survive. Are you sitting comfortably? Good, then let's begin. How did we get here? Subscription services have been a popular method of retail for decades now, whether it be the morning paper, the milk bottle on the front step, or the membership to that club, group or gym that you really should go to more often. Here in the United Kingdom, the first cable subscriptions seem to have mostly sprung up in areas where traditional TV broadcast signals were poor, and companies basically sprung up to provide a paid-for solution, such as in the earlier 20th century in Swindon, where a local tram network company realised they could use their cable network to distribute broadcasts to those unable to pick them up directly. The idea of a subscription model in this instance makes sense, since you are effectively renting the equipment that runs the signal to your home. You have nothing to purchase, and instead have a continual service, which would necessitate a continual payment. Here in the UK, we have generally relied on what we call terrestrial television for most TV viewing up until the 21st century, and the only regular cost was the BBC TV licence that was implemented in 1946 to fund the public broadcaster's output. This meant that the only barrier to television outside of the licence itself was the purchase of the TV set, and that outside of niche localised services, most were relatively protected from commercial interests right up until the 70s. That changed when, like so much in this country, Thatcher happened. Thatcher wanted to get the free market more involved in every aspect of our daily lives, and so in the early 80s local cable services were franchised out, and in the 1984 Cable and Broadcasting Act her government gave TV cable companies the ability to offer as many channels as they like, and reduced the oversight of the state in the way that TV services were managed. This very same year, Satellite Television Limited gets its first licence to operate in the UK on Swindon Cable, paving the way for its full launch in 1989 in its true form as Sky Television. At this point, it was estimated that according to the Cable Authority Final Report and Accounts 1990, thanks Wikipedia, there were only 149,000 homes subscribed to cable services. Cable and satellite services naturally required a continual payment for a continual service, moving TV funding from one largely determined by ad revenue into the realm of substantial monthly payments from the end user, forever changing the way that most would pay for televisual content. The advert stayed, of course. From a business perspective, subscription-style payments are generally preferable to one-off lump sums or the potential ebbs and flows of ad revenue, since it helps with ensuring the business has a healthy cash flow, and it makes it a more attractive prospect for investment given its more stable financial base and, as a result, a better understanding of future financial performance. The other key thing with a subscription, unlike say ad revenue, is that your payments remain the same regardless of the quality of the programming, and the tying down of customers into long contracts mean that there was little incentive to produce more quality than was needed to maintain a stable subscriber base. See, in the old world, a TV station that regularly showed inferior shows would see a dip in viewers, which would then affect their ad revenue, which is rather mitigated by the creation of a paying user base that can be then held hostage by minimum contract terms and labyrinthian cancellation processes, usually via busy call centres. So why would people be willing to pay so much for a service that essentially offers the same as what already existed? It's all just TV, right? Well, what we begin to see is the creation of network exclusive content, the most famous example in the UK being Sky Sports. In the early 90s, Sky identified that the UK's obsession with football made it a prime candidate for paywalling, since if Sky controlled exclusive televisual access to the sport, many would feel compelled to pay for it. Indeed, Murdoch has been quoted as describing the sport as the battering ram for pay television, which feels suitably bloodthirsty and blunt coming as it is from the withered old lich himself. So it was that upon the creation of the Premier League in 1992, parent company B Sky B bid £304 million to successfully host all televised Premier League matches, and upon gaining those rights, created a paid subscription specific to that channel, namely Sky Sports. Boxing later shared a similar fate, and pretty much every other sport followed too. What all this proved was that people would pay extra to access content they wanted, and once this point was proved, the TV industry never looked back. Once you have paywalled content and a strong marketing budget, it is a relatively straightforward thing to manipulate people into wanting what you have, provided you are halfway competent in identifying what people want. We talk quite a lot about FOMO these days, that is, fear of missing out. The idea that you don't want to feel like you're the only one not watching the popular TV programme, playing the video game, or attending the live show everyone is talking about. It is especially prevalent these days. We only need to look at the success of Sky Atlantic with Game of Thrones, or Netflix with Stranger Things and Squid Game, to see how TV networks can weaponise hype to ensure that a person feels like everyone else is watching it but them, and how if you miss out, you'll be alienated from the conversation of friends and colleagues. This has long been the case though. Whether it was the aforementioned sports being held hostage or popular shows like The Simpsons, Curb Your Enthusiasm and Soccer AM that were only available on a paid subscription service. TV networks wanted you to know you were either part of the in crowd or a weird out of touch freak that I don't know, reads books or something. Subscribers to paid TV networks usually had to access the content via a TV box of some kind. And this allowed for another development that would come to be quite important in this conversation, namely that of data collection and usage. The individual household's TV boxes allowed broadcasters to identify individual customers, what they were watching, what they weren't, and were able to begin building a picture of people's viewing habits much more accurately than before. Up to this point, it was all Nielsen ratings and guesswork, but as the technology improved, as well as being able to transmit data to the customer, the ability to then receive data back became a huge part of the way networks could then adjust programming, sell ad space, and tailor their offering to best accommodate their customer base. As the internet began to be involved more and interactivity began being a bigger feature, this data element became more and more valuable, as companies like Amazon and Google began accumulating everything they could data-wise, creating an asset out of pure information, on the understanding that if you can understand a customer on an individual basis, you can tailor content and advertising directly to them. And it is this individual focus that began the process towards digital streaming subscriptions, as the interplay between user data and a personalized experience tailored to the end user was a natural evolution of the relationship between consumer and content provider. And to be fair, that needn't be a purely negative thing. Once internet reliability and speeds had reached sufficient levels, it was only a matter of time before someone said, "Hey guys, rather than watching what you were told to by some stuffy old cable company, on the internet you can watch what you want, when you want, and for much less money too." Streaming video had become a rising phenomenon in the mid-2000s, with Google acquiring YouTube and Netflix launching its digital service in 2007. Though it would take a few more years for things to really take off, digital streaming did become a viable alternative for mainstream viewing in the 2010s, with YouTube offering free content and Netflix a very reasonable £5-ish a month. Netflix in particular had access to classic movies and TV shows with no ad breaks and all episodes available, as and when they were wanted. In one stroke, virtually destroying the DVD industry in just a few years and creating a virtual utopia for those of us raised on regular TV ad breaks. The whole binge-watching thing should not be understated. Being able to discover and devour a whole TV show in a few sittings was amazing, with no week's gap between each episode or having to change discs every 5 episodes only to discover that disc 3 is in another case. What I am getting at is just, it was cheaper, it was easier, and it was pretty much everything we wanted. Should have known something was up. Many I knew that had frequented the high seas stopped almost entirely, since it was way easier to just pay a little and get access via a legit service that worked well and reliably, which is a really interesting data point that I feel the industry has missed entirely, but we will touch on that more later. Netflix had managed to bottle fire, and it was both reasonably priced and easy to obtain, so what more could we ask? Then came Amazon Prime, and that was okay. Decent sized movie library, tangential shopping benefits, and that was quite reasonable too. Then Sky introduced Now TV, which allowed for access to their programming much cheaper than via their traditional platforms. And that was still not badly priced. In fact, even if I had all three, it would still cost a bit less than the cable contract used to, so that's okay, and it's more choice too. So long as nothing else happens, I'm quite happy. So why are subscription services getting worse? Okay guys, thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one. Seriously though, it's no great secret that many of the streaming services have struggled to make much in the way of profit so far, though Netflix and Hulu have both reported profits in the last few years. And there is obviously a bit of money sloshing around, judging by the amount of money being taken home by Netflix execs. According to this from CNBC's article from October last year, Netflix profit beats expectations, ad tier subscriptions rise. Sarandos and former co-CEO Reed Hastings each took home more than $50 million in 2022. Still though, many of the streaming services have found it to be harder going than they had expected, especially since most had blindly leapt into the market after the initial explosion of subscriptions in 2019 and 2020 during COVID. Everyone was hyped to be fighting for our custom, and then, well, according to this June 2023 article from MovieWeb.com entitled "Are Streaming Services Actually Profitable?", this changed in spring 2022, when Netflix announced the shocking news that for the first time in a decade, the streaming giant lost subscribers. Before, companies measured success via subscriber growth, not revenue. New streamers are tighter with their purse strings as executives look to increase revenue and stock prices. The news that Netflix, the seemingly unassailable streaming service god emperor, had started to flounder sent waves of panic through the excitable throngs of investors and execs who had not, apparently, thought to consider if this whole streaming malarkey was actually making any money. Indeed, as IndieWire puts it in their March 2023 article, ranking the winners in the streaming wars used to be all about subscriber totals. Still important, but revenue is rising on the list of executive priorities, especially for the services that haven't yet turned a profit, which is to say, most of them. Suddenly questions are being asked about whether the market has become saturated and whether the total number of subscribers is stabilizing to some extent, meaning that businesses are pivoting from trying to attract as many new customers as possible to working out the best way to make their existing customers profitable. And generally, that's bad news for us folks. Deloitte put it thusly in their article, Driven to Tears, Streaming Video Services Look Up Their Profitability Game with Viewers. It has been said that history doesn't exactly repeat, but it does often rhyme. And 2024 will likely see a return of some of the mechanisms and business models that helped media and entertainment companies become highly profitable before the streaming revolution. Yay! So let's talk about what that might mean for us customers. First off, we are going to see the reintroduction of adverts, as has already been announced on most platforms and which has already driven me from Now TV personally. The last thing I need when I'm trying to watch something is the soul-crushing reminder that capitalism wants me to buy more of its overpriced, overmarked shite. With what money, capitalism? With what money? However, we know it's either already here or at the very least coming soon on Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Now TV. Though on some it will be part of another tier, giving subscribers the choice of paying more to maintain their current level of ad-free bliss or having a cheaper but ad-riddled version. Netflix has already rolled this out in some territories, and the bad news is it's working for them, as per this from movieweb.com. Once Netflix added its ad-supported tier, the company found that these subscribers earn £8.50 more a month than standard customers. As streamers come to discover that subscriptions alone can't pay for the type of prestige content audiences crave, they're moving more and more to a multi-tiered model that brings in revenue from multiple sources, just like cable before it. As well as adverts, we have also seen the unwelcome return to weekly episodic releases on streaming services, in an attempt to reduce the churn of memberships by savvy consumers who will join, consume the new series, and then leave before the second month's payment. This form of drip-fed artificial scarcity is a defensive tactic designed to stabilise memberships, turning a week's viewing into potentially months, with maybe the consumer forgetting about switching off or becoming invested in another show during that time. Another big Netflix move was its tightening of access restrictions, in an attempt to reduce password sharing and ensure that there is an active account in each household accessing its content, which led to some consternation from its customer base, though again, it is being credited with an improvement in their profitability. As per this from Forbes' October article, the Netflix password sharing crackdown is working. Netflix's password sharing crackdown angered a lot of users, with many threatening to ditch the streaming service for good. It's now become clear that Netflix is going to continue with the ban on sharing passwords after its results for the third quarter revealed a surge in subscribers. Disney hasn't been immune from the pain either, and the service recently announced that it too would be cracking down on password sharing. Note the timing of Disney's announcement. Less than a month after Netflix's July quarterly results showed its crackdown was working. One of the wonders of the marketplace of ideas is how all these big companies just basically watch each other and copy what they perceive to be working. Just business megaminds out here, copying each other's homework for the low price of $50 million a year. Along with the increase in restrictions designed to curtail password sharing, we've also seen more use of concurrent usage restrictions, where the service provider can now create tiers that offer different numbers of users being able to access the app at the same time. This provides another way to push people onto higher tariffs, particularly if you have 2 or 3 people living in the same house. So we get it, things are getting worse for the customer, and likely more expensive. As per this from The Verge in January of this year, entitled "Streaming Services Keep Getting More Expensive." Companies are looking for any way they can to improve their bottom line. They're cracking down on password sharing, cancelling shows for the tax breaks, and even selling their priced content to other platforms. But the most common strategy is simply to charge you, the viewer, more. $1 here, $2 there, add it all up and the golden era of TV suddenly has a pretty startling ticket price. Now, while most streaming services will boast of increases in library size to somewhat mitigate the increases in price, there is something of a caveat to that claim. since particularly on the bigger players, a lot of that content is newer and self-produced content. According to the Economic Times India and their self-explanatory July 23 article, 55% of Netflix US comprises Netflix originals. The trend towards producing own brand content looks set to continue. And according to FDI Intelligence's February article on the streaming wars, most of the major players are planning big spending increases for the next year. This push for own brand content comes as a result of the aforementioned push for profitability, as per this from a 2018 article on The Motley Fool entitled "Look How Much Netflix Saves by Producing Its Own Originals." While in-house productions cost a lot more up front, the company is saving a ton of money in the long term. Netflix has shifted a growing portion of its massive content budget to original productions. Not only that, but it's moving more of those productions in-house to Netflix studios instead of licensing content from other studios. The shift provides Netflix more control over its projects, including the ability to stream shows globally and retain the intellectual property. But producing content in-house also ends up saving Netflix a lot of money in the long run. There's a 30 to 50% markup on the shows that are produced by the studio for us, Chief Content Officer Ted Sarandos told the audience at a recent investors conference. This is not all bad news for consumers. Some of Netflix's shows have been very well received, and indeed Netflix has been the saviour of a number of shows dropped by other networks. But it isn't all sunshine for the consumer. The danger with a TV network owning an IP outright is that it can have something of a conflict of interest when it comes to its decision making about when considering whether or not to produce more content for a show. Netflix in particular has a pretty gnarly reputation for killing shows early, and has made many an internet enemy with shows like 1899, The OA and Shadow and Bone not surviving their planned storylines. And this is all based on ruthless network logic. And according to this article from Forbes in January 23, entitled "The Hidden Reason Netflix Keeps Cancelling Shows Like 1899, a show's survival is allegedly based more on its completion rate than its total viewer numbers, with shows that fall below a 50% completion rate seemingly being cancelled with remarkable consistency. The completion rate is what percentage of a show's audience actually finishes the show. And according to third-party measurement services who believe they can track that sort of thing, Netflix often directly ties which shows get cancelled and renewed to completion rates. Article writer Paul Tassi goes on to explain the problems this approach can cause. This still creates the same graveyard problem, and upsetting 30 or 40% of viewers of a show with each cancellation is still significant. It is also a self-fulfilling prophecy that fewer people will invest in series that they expect will probably get cancelled anyway. Second, completion rate feels like it would be skewed in favour of shorter and more easily digestible shows. Third, we know that budget is still a factor here. A series that costs less is likely to be forgiven a bit more than a show with expensive special effects, other metrics aside. These kind of criteria can lead to the creation of content that finds itself directly or indirectly conforming to these requirements, much like we have seen in the music industry, as the different selling formats have influenced the creative output of artists, and more importantly, of the record companies dictating the requirements for its artists. For example, as put in the Neon Music article, album formats and how they have changed over the years. Whether it be a piece of wax, a piece of plastic, a phone or a laptop, we for the most part access music by proxy, and these proxies shape the music itself more than we may think. We tend to think of the albums we listen to as organic, pieces of art that exist as the artist intended. However, they are in fact often sculpted by the necessity of format, by the commercialization of said format. They go on to add, as a result of this increase in ambition, albums started to increase in length, moving towards the 40 to 45 minute mark. They still rarely exceeded this, however, simply because 45 minutes is the maximum amount of music that can be stored on a 12-inch vinyl LP. This did not change until the introduction of the CD. CDs could store up to 80 minutes of audio, whilst also being cheaper to produce than vinyl. The attitude in the industry at the time was that you had to fill the CD, a matter of value for money, and this attitude persisted throughout much of the 2000s. Then, digital music entered the scene. The biggest player in that scene, initially at least, was iTunes, as per this from digital music distributor TuneCore's pricing explanation. For iTunes, your music will be automatically priced according to the following formulas. Total number of songs times 99 cents equals the price of the album. However, if an album has more than 10 songs, the price will automatically be $9.99. Coincidentally, a lot of artists started releasing 10-track albums around that time. Why are we talking about all this? If Netflix is indeed basing its decision-making on metrics that favour shorter, less episode-heavy content, owing to its cheaper budgets and higher completion rates, it's easy to see how it will affect the kind of shows being produced, licensed and added to its libraries. And let's be real, if that's what Netflix is doing, the others will follow, given that no TV exec has had an original thought since cocaine. It also highlights the conflict of interest inherent in the industry when considering what is best for its content creators, its consumers, or its overall bottom line, as per this quote from the mysterious Batgirl content that never was from MovieWeb.com's Is Streaming Actually Profitable article. What likely happened to Batgirl is what's been happening throughout the streaming industry. Companies see it as more profitable to take tax write-downs on these projects because it's a safer financial bet. Just look at the slew of content Disney removed from Disney Plus and Hulu in May 2023, to the tune of approximately $1.5 to $1.8 billion in write-downs. Removing content also means companies no longer have to pay out royalties and residuals for those shows and movies, saving them even more money at content creators' expense. It is a difficult tightrope to walk where you are balancing the production of the best possible content along with what might possibly best suit your financial outlook. But ultimately it's a tightrope where the onus is always going to be on profit. So you are going to be falling one way or another, it just depends on whether you cancel after season 1 or season 3. In a similar vein, own brand content is also very vulnerable to financial decisions affecting access to content, as we have started to see streaming services sacrificing poor performing shows on the altar of tax write-offs. As per this from theconversation.com's July 2023 article, streaming services are removing original TV and films. What does this mean for your favourite show and the cultural heritage? Previously, content has usually been removed from streaming services due to licensing agreements. This removal means that the particular television series and films are no longer available to view on that streaming service, but may re-emerge on another streaming service as the licensing shifts. But the more recent content removal discussion raises questions associated with streaming services and their overarching corporations wanting to save money. This can be done through the removal of content, which the corporation can write off as losses. This raises fresh concerns about the life expectancy of modern media, where access to original content may be arbitrarily locked away, and the actual artwork lost forever once it becomes a financial burden to the rights owner, regardless of the efforts of the creators involved or the consumers requesting it. The article continues and explains the wider impact of such behaviours. This not only impacts consumer access, but also impacts actors, writers, directors, and other creatives involved in the production. This is due to the fact that if the profits are less than the residual payments, fees paid when TV shows and films are broadcast, made to creatives involved in the production are also lowered. What needs to be considered with many of these is that they are originals, meaning they were created by Disney for Disney. The removal of original content from streaming services, in most instances, mean they will not be accessible to viewers anywhere. It seems bizarre to be concerned with archiving in a digital age, and yet here we are. Another side effect of the streaming services pursuing their own content creation is that third-party content is finding its platform reduced. Whilst it's true that TV streaming services now have more shows and movies than 5 years ago, the proportion of third-party content gets smaller every year, and it's becoming much trickier to find specific third-party content as a result. In the last year, I've been trying to find somewhere to stream King of the Hill, Young Frankenstein, and Gonjiam Haunted Asylum, and I've discovered that even across the 25 odd subscription services I've looked through, well, see for yourself. How is it that a comedy movie classic, a beloved 13-season animated series, and a highly regarded Asian horror movie are somehow not available anywhere? Could it be that with budgets being pushed towards the creation of content that the streaming service themselves can control, the money available for licensing external content is being squeezed, especially with concerns over profitability racking the industry? Total expenditure across the industry is expected to drop in the next few years, as per this from FDI's Streaming Wars article. Streaming platforms, including Netflix, have also moderated their spending budgets to cut costs and rolled out new subscription models, including cheaper options that come with increased advertising, in a bid to retain subscribers. In 2023, growth in content expenditure for the industry is expected to fall from 2022's 6% to just 2% according to Ampere analysis, marking the second lowest rate for more than a decade after 2020. In the same article, we've already been told Between 2022 and 2027, Disney Plus is expecting to increase its annual investment into original content by 82.8%, according to the London-based research firm Ampere Analysis. Amazon Prime Video plays second with an expected growth rate of almost 70% in its original content investment, followed by other streaming platforms Peacock, Netflix and Paramount. If the new content pie is getting smaller or staying the same size, but the original content slice is getting bigger, the amount left for third-party content will fill the squeeze. If, like me, you thought that a future of digital content would mean access to all your favourite movies and that you could get rid of those bulky DVD collections, I'm sad to say it looks like the market has moved in a different direction. Sorry. So what does that all mean for us, the poor end user? Yeah, I think we need to talk about piracy. Now, as anyone who grew up watching DVDs as their primary viewing medium, I'm sure you will recognise this. But mainstream movie and TV piracy really reached wider audiences during the mid-2000s and into the 2010s, when peer-to-peer sharing was all the rage. It started out with music more than movies or TV, given the average speed of the internet back then, but it eventually became a huge source for entertainment content, as internet access became more widespread and the music and DVD industries refused to react in any way other than trying to kill Napster. And yet, once Netflix came on the scene, with an affordable, convenient service not limited by exclusivity, not plagued with adverts, and not with its content split across 25 different services, it would appear that many happily transitioned into legal streaming. Piracy numbers in the EU, for example, fell every year from 2017 to 2021. Even during COVID, a time when many were a captive audience, many chose Netflix rather than pirate. Now, piracy numbers are a somewhat nebulous thing, given the big networks will overstate the numbers and journos rely on a very small number of sources, but the important part is the direction of the numbers, as opposed to the accuracy of them. The numbers were going down. Then, in 2021, TV piracy increased a little, maybe just an anomaly perhaps. Movies still came down again after all, but then 2022, TV piracy leaps up by 3 billion accesses in the EU. That's 19% in 1 year. Now, do you know the thing I find most interesting about this data set? Music piracy continues to fall. Now, the music industry might be slightly ahead of TV and movies, having faced their industry crisis in the early 2000s, and emerged with a similar solution to TV and movies, that being a transition from content ownership to content access via streaming services. There have been many players that have come and gone in music streaming, with a handful of big players now dominating the market and competing for everyone's custom. But there is one key difference to what has happened in music and what is now happening in TV and movies: platform exclusivity. If you are looking to listen to your favourite album, you don't need to check if it is on your preferred music streaming service, because with very few exceptions, they are all available on all services. Vitally, this means that the competing services must use price, quality, accessibility, ease of use, interfaces, and additional services to compete for your custom. Imagine having to change app between albums because Metallica and Iron Maiden were only available on one service at a time, or as my wife suggests, having to go between apps for Taylor Swift and Orville Peck. Thankfully, with most music, you don't need to have multiple subscriptions to access the content you want. If we contrast that with the TV streaming services, if you wanted to watch your favourite franchises, say Rings of Power and/or House of the Dragon, you will need 3 separate subscriptions. Indeed, as tech journalist Carl Bode wrote in their article, "The streaming TV sector still doesn't realise exclusives will drive users back to piracy," written way back in 2019 on techdirt.com, increasingly companies are pulling their content off central repositories like Hulu and Netflix and making them exclusive to their own streaming platforms, forcing consumers to subscribe to more and more streaming services if they want to get all the content they're looking for. By itself, that's not a big deal, but cumulatively, over the next few years, the sector risks creating so many exclusive silos that it begins to frustrate and annoy customers. Studies suggest that nearly every broadcaster will launch their own streaming service by 2022, and they all want their content exclusive to their own platform. Carl, you are clearly someone to listen to, as you were bang on in 2019. They continue by saying, "Ultimately, history has shown repeatedly that when consumers can't get the content they want easily, cheaply, and quickly, they will resort to piracy. Admitting this fact isn't condoning the behaviour, it's just stating a fact. Again, None of this is to say that the rise of streaming competition is a bad thing, just that there's going to be some growing pains over the next 5 years. Growing pains that the industry isn't particularly keyed into, because they're all mindlessly running head down into the trough. We've already covered off how the rush to join the gold rush of streaming TV has led to a bunch of companies regularly reporting financial losses, even as they report big subscriber numbers. And how the whole industry has pretty much shat the bed once they realised that gaining subscribers alone is not enough to be a profitable enterprise. And that in their greed, they may have created the foundation for a new era of online piracy, at least until an option can be found that can counteract the layers and layers of corporate greed that is even now forming a quagmire that it may not escape intact. Given Bode's accurate predictions in 2019, let's see what they think will happen next. Good. So we have covered how the many TV networks got a hard-on for streaming TV and ran towards it with all the restraint of Wile E. Coyote, before realising they had run too far and were now out over the edge of the ravine and left peddling thin air. With the sudden realisation, again from business experts paid millions a year, that just having subscribers wasn't enough, we are seeing the TV subscription services rapidly increasing prices, adding tiered content, introducing adverts, tightening restrictions, and leaning increasingly on IPs that they can produce themselves, with third-party content being pinged between the different channels as each deal times out, if we're lucky. The proposition for the consumer is worsening in terms of access to available content. The hurdles we have to jump to watch it, the future of content produced explicitly for streaming services, and yeah, the price. As the cost of maintaining access to all of the available content surpasses even where cable TV had gotten to, people are gravitating back to piracy, with the accepted mentality that the greed being displayed by the subscription services is no longer acceptable or reasonable. As someone on the left who enjoys consuming TV and movies, what is the alternative to the current free market-based model of subscription streaming television, and what does a socialist TV service potentially look like? The first step to establishing a new world is being able to visualize how things could be. Or as Ursula Le Guin put it back in 2014 at the National Book Awards, "I think hard times are coming when we will be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now and can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being, and even imagine some real grounds for hope." She goes on to say, "The profit motive often is in conflict with the aims of art. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words." And so it is then that we shall talk of a vision for television that comes not from the pursuit of profit, but instead from the view of the consumer and the creator. Let's remove the profit motive from art. So where would we start? On what foundation would this hypothetical streaming service be built? Well, I think we first need to talk about what removing profit does for us. First off, we can remove the walls enforced by exclusivity and restrictions designed to create artificial scarcity. Scarcity is, of course, a friend to those who want to justify a high price for a commodity. Our friends, towards the centre and right, worship at the altar of the free market, and the free market operates via the price mechanism. If you have 10 burgers and 5 customers, the price of the burgers will come down to try and interest more customers until they have the 10 customers they need. If you have 5 burgers and 10 customers, the price of the burgers will increase until only 5 interested customers remain. Simple, right? The idea is that the price of the commodity reflects its relative value, based upon how much of it there is and how many people want it at any one point. Lots of people try to demonstrate their economic intellect on Twitter and the like by dropping the old "it's supply and demand, don't you know?" And this is the core essence of it. Why are we talking about all this boring economic stuff? Well, because the price mechanism doesn't really work if the scarcity of a commodity is artificially restricted. Going back to those burgers for one more minute. Imagine for a second you bought the exclusive rights to sell burgers in your town. You could pretty much charge whatever you wanted. If people want a burger, they will need to pay what you want to charge them for it. That is not a free market. In fact, this is a monopoly. And as per the board game responsible for ruining many a rainy Saturday, according to Google and the Oxford Dictionary, a monopoly is the exclusive possession or control of the supply of or trade in a commodity or service. So if I have all the burgers, I'm running a burger monopoly. And when I'm running a monopoly, do you know what stops me exploiting that fact at everyone's expense? Not a thing. Now, there are supposed to be a bunch of institutional mechanisms to stop monopolies from occurring, but for some reason, they don't seem to work too well. It would appear that if you have a class of people in charge of making money and monitoring the making of money, sometimes things can end up mysteriously suiting that same class. Weird. So, how do we stop a TV streaming service from becoming a brand monopoly? Or in other words, from controlling the supply of a particular kind of content? Remove artificial scarcity. You remove the artificial scarcity, or in other words, you remove exclusivity. Digital TV streaming is just transmission of data, which means that you aren't going to run out of The Mandalorian, for example. So it could be on every network and it would not affect its supply. It is a post-scarcity commodity. Let the streaming services compete on the free market using their prices, their interfaces, their ranging and their features, rather than using content that they can paywall and hoard to themselves. Imagine, for example, if every network could offer Stranger Things. Suddenly Netflix's stranglehold feels just a tiny bit looser, doesn't it? Exclusivity doesn't benefit the consumer. It simply allows a provider to leverage their content and control pricing. So let's just bin it. If you can remove exclusivity, you can also remove the regionality that blights so much of TV and movies, where the tangle of different licensing agreements and areas of control make a universal library of content virtually impossible, as per this from the International Film and Television Alliance. There are a myriad of third-party contractual relationships and licenses which need to be negotiated and put in place so that the production can be delivered to audiences for the first run of distribution. Distributors are licensed exclusively for their country, language, and release platform. Major national distributors generally take all rights for their country in exchange for providing an upfront guarantee and then sub-license to cinema chains, television, cable, and VOD platforms. The idea of needing a national distributor for digital content feels a bit wacky 20th century to me. We aren't talking about reels of film going out to cinemas, we are talking about what is essentially glorified file hosting. And the whole thing seems to be something of a hangover from the old way of doing things, relics of the old world clinging to power and trying to eke out money as a gatekeeper to a captive national audience. The disparity caused by all these additional layers of complexity, however, is ably demonstrated by the following table taken from Finder.com, detailing different Netflix library sizes by region. American Samoa is apparently the place to be for movies, but Equatorial Guinea, not so much. TV shows and movies would still need to be paid for by streaming services, of course, so that people that make the content are getting paid. And theoretically, if you can suddenly have each service hosting the certain shows, that might actually see an increase in the money moving towards creators. However, if you have own brand content that is produced by the streaming service, such as Stranger Things with Netflix or Rings of Power or Amazon, they could still leverage their ownership of that content to make it unaffordable for anyone but them to host that content, right? That does sound like something pointlessly selfish that a big corporate entity would do, doesn't it? As touched on previously, under this current version of capitalism, it benefits streaming services to produce their own content, since it allows them to create enclosures around their content, ensuring that theirs is the only service to provide that particular content. This exclusivity acts as a marketing tool, allows them to charge more for access, and builds the brand of the streaming service beyond that of simply a service provider. This increases their value to investors and shareholders, which is, after all, their raison d'etre. It also allows the service provider to create a set of preferential parameters that will affect content produced for them or by them, as we mentioned in the section dealing with how Netflix measures a show's success. If shorter shows with lower episode counts tend to achieve a higher completion rate, and that happens to be an arbitrary core metric for judging the performance of a show and its likelihood of being renewed, guess how future shows are going to look? Producing their own content also allows TV subscription services to do dirty tricks like cancelling movies and TV shows before release if they believe the tax write-off to be better than the potential performance of the content. Or it allows them to bury poor performing shows by removing them from the library and writing them off. Programs that were removed after being cancelled on Disney Plus have included Big Shot, Diary of a Future President, Just Beyond, The Mighty Ducks Game Changers, The Mysterious Benedict Society, The World According to Jeff Goldblum, Turner and Hooch, and Willow. What needs to be considered with many of these is that they are originals, meaning that they were created by Disney for Disney. The removal of original content from streaming services in most instances means that they will not be available to viewers anywhere. As part of the removal of programs, Disney recently reported it would take a $1.5 billion write-down from the axed content. So there is sort of a Bermuda Triangle for digital content being created, where big corporations are burying art in order to protect profits. And if it were up to me, any new subscription service would not have the power to do this. Keeping creators and service providers separate allows both to focus on their primary goals and allows everyone to prioritise their end product rather than the bottom line. Streaming services being able to manipulate original content production and our ability to access it hurts consumers, hurts the content creators, and it actually creates another problem with regards to the cultural value of art that I will cover now. There have been many instances over the years of lost shows and movies where, for one reason or another, no copy was kept, or because of cost-saving measures such as detailed in this 2017 article from Mental Floss entitled Wipeout. When tapes would begin to pile up in dressing rooms, corridors and other areas, it became an untenable situation. New productions would need tape, and no one would want to spend money on new tape, Molesworth says. Not when there's perfectly good tape sitting right there. 60 to 70% of all BBC programming produced between the mid-1950s and mid-1970s was deleted. Even shows now considered as culturally priceless like Doctor Who were affected, with 97 episodes feared lost forever, even after Herculean efforts to find them. However, thanks to the work of those who saw and understood the cultural value of archiving TV productions, this trend was rectified, and now the BBC Film Library keeps an extensive archive of nearly everything produced by them. There are still occasional moments where there are gaps in our historical record of films, such as with the infamous director's cut of Event Horizon, for example, that has seemingly been lost forever, as confirmed by the movie's director Paul W.S. Anderson in an interview with Sci-Fi TV in 2022. The problem with the deleted material is that we were right before the DVD revolution when Event Horizon was released, Anderson said. We were going out on VHS in ancillaries, and on VHS there was no room for all these deleted scenes, there was no reason for the studio to keep it. By the time DVD had happened and the audience for the movie had started demanding special editions, they hadn't archived a lot of that stuff, so it's just not there. There is a bit of a tie-in here with H-Bomber Guy's video on director cuts and the growing expectations of movie audiences around additional content and deleted scenes, so it might be worth giving that a watch after this. Of course, archiving has arguably become a lot easier since the development of digital technology, since now footage can be backed up onto a hard drive, with multiple copies stored on separate hard drives or discs taking up much less physical space than a single reel of tape. However, access to those archives is where modern television streaming services are beginning to create problems for consumers. We discussed earlier how TV streaming services are taking content-related decisions based on financial incentives, leading to things like the cancellation of Batgirl in order to provide a tax write-off. The idea being that the amount saved in tax payments would be greater than the revenue generated by the performance of the movie or TV programme. There is a related issue with regards to the way that content produced by a streaming service network can be pulled from libraries in order to be written off, in order to turn a poor performer into a tax write-off of potentially higher value, such as with Disney pulling so many of their own shows in order to help their bottom line. When you remove the profit motive from the decision-making process, things get a lot simpler. So we're already in a better place with our hypothetical TV service. But the question of archiving does need addressing. So my recommendation would be a publicly owned universal archive that would keep all produced content on file. We could perhaps set it up in a way so that any content not featured on a paid TV subscription service would be available on either a state-funded or a super low-priced service, so that all content from the archive was available to the public, rather than locked away in a vault. That would seem the fairest idea to me, but I would be interested to hear suggestions. Let us read the charges. The bane of cable TV, interrupter of live sports, and the returning champion of wasted time. Yes, it is time to finally execute advertising. Well, sort of. Advertising is returning to most streaming services, or at the very least, it is being offered as part of a new tiered system designed to give you control. Except, it either costs more or gets worse. Such power you wield. Given that we have already established that Netflix allegedly makes more per subscriber at the ad tier than at the higher price tier, we have to acknowledge that adverts, once successfully reintroduced, will be here to stay. They will likely also increase in frequency, length and volume if past experience is anything to go by. We can look to YouTube for a proxy as to how this may look over time, as a nominally free service that is constantly evolving its advertising levels to try and maximise profits without driving users off of the platform. As per this September 22 article from insiderintelligence.com entitled "YouTube Tests Users' Tolerance for Increased Ad Loads" that describes a period of YouTube ad experimentation. The news. YouTube is trying to figure out exactly how many ads its users will tolerate before heading elsewhere. Some social media users in recent weeks have complained about seeing 8 or even 10 consecutive unskippable pre-roll ads before a video begins. YouTube typically will display 2 pre-roll ads. It's not just pre-roll. Ad interruptions in larger videos might occur every few minutes according to several Reddit postings. Recent tweets and Reddit threads reveal ad breaks with up to 10 consecutive non-skippable advertisements. These longer interruptions seem to be happening more frequently lately, though users seem to be experiencing ad breaks of about 5 ads more commonly than breaks featuring 10. Now look, I get all this stuff needs to be paid for. I do. But let's get real here. It's just you and me here. We can be honest. Ads are the worst. Advertising is the most intrusive, annoying and inefficient use of anyone's time and money, especially if you are seeing more than one at a time. Any ideal streaming service wouldn't have adverts, would it? Especially if it's going to ask for a monthly fee for access. Removing the need for profit makes this much easier, since that's a whole layer of expense removed from the cost of doing business. And I think that since we have effectively removed content creation already for our ideal streaming service, that is also a bunch of unrelated costs removed. Maybe there is a place for appropriate advertising. Trailers remain a popular delivery system for movie advertising, for example, and I'm open to talking about the need for informing people of what exists elsewhere on the platform, but it should be led by a concern for making it work for consumers as opposed to a need to maximise profit. I think an important element of any leftist or socialist vision for television services must include commitments to inclusiveness, experimental content and artistic expression, as much as a focus on the content that does raw numbers. Diversity of culture, experience, sexuality, gender and language should be a core principle of any left platform, and it is important to ensure that decisions taken around content reflect these values. The choices around how content can be searched, which content is pushed or highlighted to viewers and which shows are funded need to be balanced between popularity, breadth and diversity to ensure that content is given a platform in terms of its values as art and representation as opposed to just earning potential. Even beyond the accusations of wokery, this is not just about ensuring we get a variety of voices being represented, but also a variety of styles, approaches, points of view and methods for expression to avoid the very thing that Netflix is in danger of at the moment, namely the nullification of creativity as a virtue of short-sighted metrics. Art needs room to breathe, so the portal through which we enjoy it should ensure that it is not adding restrictions of its own that end up reflected in that very art. A quite vital part of any left-orientated TV service would be the usage and ownership of data. Data can help improve a service. Netflix has been able to do some quite clever stuff with its data to make its recommendations and the way it presents information to the consumer tailored to exactly their tastes. So I don't necessarily want to stop all data exchange per se. There would, however, need to be a very simple and clear declaration of what data would be used and how. There would need to be options to decline the use of data beyond the strictly necessary. And perhaps most importantly of all, the ownership of any data collected would need to belong to the user and not the service provider, so that it can't be shared with anyone externally or used in any other way than was specified. Ownership of personal data should be a core leftist principle in all areas of life, and a TV service provider should be no different. You may lend your data to the service, but it always remains yours to dictate and can be rescinded at any time. So there we have it, a profit-free, post-scarcity, consumer-focused platform which is ad-free, diverse in content and backed up by a publicly owned archive service ensuring art is preserved and accessible for future generations. Easy. Now obviously there are likely to be arguments against all of this, and I'm hardly an expert on TV production or streaming services, But I'm always happy to start a conversation on anything, if it means we can start talking about what we could do, as opposed to just letting the market decide, because the market will hawk any old bullshit. How will we pay for it? What a boring question, and normally the first challenge to any left-wing ideas. Capitalist tears, maybe, I don't know, use your imagination. God knows as a nation we always seem to have enough money around to chuck bombs at poor countries in the Middle East or host royal events for the latest unnecessary non-entities celebrating living too long or marrying their second cousin. Finding enough starting capital to create a streaming service and some TV production teams shouldn't be too hard in comparison. This video basically came from my frustrations at trying to find a way to watch King of the Hill, which was unavailable everywhere I looked, and the introduction of adverts into several services I use. I grew up first with terrestrial TV and then as a teen with Sky, so I feel like I've watched my life's share of adverts at this stage, and frankly I have an almost visceral reaction to ad breaks. They are invasive, loud, and I genuinely doubt they are a good return on investment. The early days of digital Netflix were a revelation to me in terms of the quality of service, the affordability, and the presentation of the content. And even as late as when joined by Prime and Now TV, the options were infinitely preferable to what had gone before. Now we are seeing a return to what made television a bloated and expensive mess, and all in the name of profit. The consumer is once again relegated to little more than a hostage, since as soon as one service establishes that a drop in standards is acceptable to its audience, all the others will follow, as they always do, because again, competition breeds innovation. I wanted to look into why this is happening, beyond the age-old clambering for profit maximisation, and to look into the specific drivers behind what is happening with 21st century TV. As the number of subscription services needed to watch my favourite shows start to climb higher than I would like, the prices move from £5 a month to more like 10 or 12, and I can find little other than the content produced by that network, I have to take stock of the TV situation and make some choices. I love Star Trek, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Dragula, Foundation and Game of Thrones. Now that is 6 subscription services I want access to all of them, for a combined total of a lot. Certainly a lot more than my earnings have gone up by in the same period anyway. So we have looked at the history of television in the UK and the way that televisual content has evolved from the regional cable TV in Swindon, carried by tram cable, to internet-based digital services, and what the drivers were for those changes, good and bad. Incidentally, is there a single thing that hasn't been ruined by Thatcher? Answers on a postcard. We then talked about the decline in the service being received by the consumer, and what had spooked the TV networks into both running headlong into streaming services and then slamming the brakes on once Netflix recorded their first drop in subscriber numbers. A helpful reminder that business geniuses are created by PR teams and not universities. We talked about how the change in focus from subscriber accumulation to profit per customer had driven the return of ad breaks, sharing restrictions, show cancellations, and a focus on content that was created and owned by the networks themselves, and what all that might mean for TV in the future. Then we had a little brainstorm around what a leftist TV subscription service might look like, and explored what problems could be solved by removing the profit motive, artificial scarcity, conflicts of interest, and advertising from TV subscription services, and replacing them with accessible archiving, diverse programming, and a consumer-focused end product. Now, as I'm sure you are aware, given you're watching this on YouTube, I am a humble 200 subscriber YouTuber with no experience in TV, movies or streaming services, so I have relied heavily on extensive article reading and research to be able to compile the info in this video, which have all been cited and referenced, Mr. H-Bomber Guy, I promise. There is a complex world of rights ownership, geographical distributors, telecoms restrictions and cash flow projections between us and the services we want. And I've hardly touched on any of that, but I mean, how long do you want these videos to be? It's 1:45 in the morning on a Thursday night. What I'm saying is, if there is a hole in my logic or a gap in my knowledge, please do tell me in the comments, but do it politely, yeah? I'm always happy to discuss things in the comments, but if you come in hot, you will be ignored. Something I feel has been lost since 2019 is the optimism and imagination that was running throughout the UK left, where people were envisioning what a socialist UK could look like, with nationalised medicine production, social care, energy and water, with refreshed ideas for functional infrastructures, with our proposed alternatives to industry, entertainment and news. It feels like that election loss in 2019 crushed more than Corbyn's Labour, but also the intellectual confidence of the left to propose and sell visions of a better world. I would argue that we need that vision and optimism now, more than ever, as we need something to fight for, rather than just against. So, what does the future of TV and movies look like to you? Please post in the comments and let me know. We need more left voices, opinions and ideas, and we need them more than ever. Thank you for watching this video and for sticking with me until this very bitter end. Big shout out to Mrs. Inside Left, who's sleeping in there, or hopefully sleeping in there right now, who continues to help me check my scripts, make sure I'm making sense and just trying to keep everything from becoming a mess. She interrogates my ideas and she supports my little YouTube adventure, so thank you. Also, big shout out to Nicko, who's very kindly shared with me this lovely lapel mic, as well as some very nice camera filters, all out of the kindness of their heart. Your generous spirit is very much appreciated. Thank you, Nicko. If you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe for more content. Take care everyone, be thoughtful, be generous, and most of all, be kind to each other. Bye for now.